Hello everybody, it's Grandmama. Time for another story from a Hometown Scrapbook by Ben Weatherwax. Gloomy, Trezise. Hello there. If you knew the sheriff, this story tonight will have a personal twist to it. For no one could be a sheriff's friend and not remember it until his last moment on earth. No more than one could ever forget the sheriff if they had seen him in action. For when it came to sheer color and a one-man program of human drama, outright masculinity, and a strange leavening of naive boyishness, there was nothing that ever walked the face of this earth quite like him. If it was fighting, he was top dog with 10-to-1 odds. If it was bellying up to the bar, he would be the last man on his feet. If it was fighting with the Australians, wrestling in a prize ring, trying to break his neck on a motorcycle race, fishing for tuna in deep water, or cleaning out the Bristows in Mexico, the sheriff was the man to do the job. So, tonight, we'll tell you the story of Gloomy, the man's man, who was known to the Grays Harbor as the sheriff, and whose story has a special reason for telling on this very night. If you were to ransack the records of Pacific County, you would find the name Trezise scrawled in rude boyish hand over the official documents of the county sheriff's office, on deeds, petitions, and countless other documents. For although the man didn't believe in signing anything, he signed almost everything one time or another. The name of Trezise, Roy W. Trezise, to be exact, but 1,000,000 men knew him by the name of Gloomy. We're not much interested in Gloomy's dim and distant past, except to establish the general character of this fellow. And let's start with the history just before the World War, when a big, baby-faced kid who was too big for his clothes happened to notice that there was a war going on in Europe. Raymond, that was Gloomy's home in those days. Raymond was an isolated little lumber town down on Willapa Harbor, but the news of the war filtered down that way, and Gloomy Gus, that was the rest of us, Gloomy Gus got wind of it. Now, if you knew Gloomy, you'd understand that if there was a fight on, he wanted a piece of it. And since his own country wasn't yet lashed up in the free-for-all, Gloomy had to pick an adopted country to join with. He never told me why, but somehow he picked Australia. And when his friends on Willapa Harbor heard from him again, it was Lance Private Roy W. Trezise of the Australian Army Corps. And true to the perseverity that was part of him, he was not slogging through the mud of Flanders Field. He was riding a minesweeper in the English Channel as a machine gunner. When his own country got in, he swapped uniforms and became a Yankee again. And when the war was over, he came home. Gloomy was like any other young fellow out of uniform. He couldn't get the pack off of his back for a while. He floundered from one thing to another. He went to school on the GI Bill, did not become an engineer as you might think, or play football as lots of folks did. No, Gloomy was different. He went to the Cornish school to study interpretive dancing. I lived with the long hairs, he used to say, but I didn't take to it. And from that, Gloomy went to something that looked like fit him a little bit better, professional boxing. You see, Gloomy was a whale of a man, not so tall, just an even 6 foot, but with shoulders like an ox and hands like a Smithfield hammers, and power built in to lift a house, and a heart that never quite let him down. And he battled in the ring from time to time without showing much promise. And then he switched to professional wrestling. From that, he went to motorcycle racing and then became an amateur flyer. And when the Depression hit, he went to fishing out of Willapa Harbor and Grays Harbor, and his hands grew tougher with pulling the lines and grinding salt into his hide. And then, with the Depression half run, the citizens elected him sheriff of Pacific County. If a man ever looked the part, it was Gloomy. He looked like the Lord had vested him with the physical power to enforce the laws that men made. And his punch-marked features, with his sea-going roll, gave him a character that belonged in the rough-house Pacific County of the rum running down and out at the hills of the Depression days. Packing his .45, Gloomy roamed the county, gathering in lawbreakers, and the gun was an ornament as far as the sheriff was concerned. No one with Gloomy's look and physique needed a gun. They came along peacefully when he crooked his finger. It was about that time that the Marine Corps was organizing its reserve program, and after they had placed a company of reservists in Aberdeen, the district marine officer went to Willapa Harbor to sight in a likely-looking CO for a company in Raymond. He circulated through the veterans organizations, and one of the names that they all recognized was Gloomy. Gloomy Trezise. When he was Gloomy, the sheriff showed Colonel the town. It was a deal. They made a Marine lieutenant out of Gloomy, and he organized a platoon. In time, the platoon disbanded. Captain Jack Clark of B Company, Grays Harbor's Marine Corps Reserve Unit, needed help. He enlisted the sheriff, and when he wasn't snapping the wristlets on a couple of culprits, Gloomy was drilling a platoon on the port dock or snapping a target pistol in the firing range at the old port dock armory. The Marine Reserve connection gave him the excuse to extend his operation to Aberdeen, and Aberdeen and Gloomy hit it off famously. He made friends with all walks of life. Captain Winbeck of North Coast Coast Guard could expect a call from Gloomy at any hour of the day or night. Big Bill Moyser, the South Beach sand purchaser, never knew when Gloomy would blow in, but when he did, the moon was high and the night grew mellow, and the time stopped dead in its tracks. Gloomy roamed the streets of Grays Harbor's town of the late 1930s more than his own Pacific County haunts, and left many a calling card. If there was anything he hated, and perhaps hated is not the right word, for the big fellow had little of that vile-flavored malaise of hate, but if there was anything he hated, it was a communist. When the communists set up a bookstore on Aberdeen's Heron Street, Gloomy stopped it first about midnight after the reserve officer meeting at the Morick Hotel. Without hesitation, he picked up 2x4 from a nearby construction job and smashed the windows out of the communist bookstore. When a wobbly climbed a soapbox on the corner of Heron and G Street and began to lambaste the government, Gloomy listened till he got the tune, and then waded through the crowd and knocked the orator off of the soapbox and into the third tier of spectators. He had finished his last term as sheriff, only the statue in Pacific County kept him from running again. Just about that time, the nation was getting fixed for World War II, and when Grays Harbor Marine Reserve Company was called out in 1940, Gloomy went along as lieutenant. In a matter of weeks, he had become a tradition in the Leatherneck Corps. On the parade ground in the fighting clothes, he looked like a one-man company. In his dress uniform, he shaped up like a one-man parade. In a month, he knew everyone, and everyone knew Gloomy. He worked hard and he played hard. One night, in a Bristow in Tijuana, aglow with a shore leave fever, Gloomy mopped up the floors of the Aloha Club with Orson Welles. And the same night, he grabbed a half-pint Mexican General and entered a dancing contest against the protest of his little partner. On duty or off-duty hours, he ranged the coast of the Baja California as the Mexicans called the peninsula, from the Ensenada to Rosita. He was Senor Gloomy. And a formal function, when the junior officers clicked their heels and watched their brass buttons, Gloomy was the life of the party, for no one, not even the commander himself, could suppress the big Marine from Grace Harbor. Gloomy's 1st Battalion commander was Lieutenant O.P. Smith, and with the customary finesse of the Corps, he bid his new officer attend a cocktail party with his house a few weeks after the reservists had been assimilated into the 6th Marine Regiment. Gloomy came late, and well ahead of the party, poked the colonel in the ribs, and with a wink advised him that if he ran out of spirits, he had a plenty supply in his car outside. Then slapped the hostess on the back and shouted, "Hello, girlie! Are you having any fun?" The Marine Corps moves fast, and faster in 1940. Gloomy was among the first of the reservists to go overseas. He was peeled off from the battalion roster and sent to Samoa with the Defense Battalion, and the island rocked with his playful roar. On the sortie to the British Samoa, to convey the regards of his commanding officer, Gloomy presented the important man with a potted palm from his own front porch, led the grand march at the bell in honor of the best-looking native girl on the island in his arms, and the British soil with a letter of recommendation from the British Constabulary, which he tried unsuccessfully to restrain him for 2 occasions, and their recommendation was more a signal of the defeat than a vote of confidence. When Pearl Harbor hit, Gloomy got a series of confidential missions in the dirty island of New Headridge, and with then defunct fever and malaria. He came back to the States fighting once again, but with something more than a match. And after a union with his old friends on Grace Harbor, the great Gloomy, now Major Trezise, went up to the Bremerton Naval Hospital and died. When the word circulated around the South Pacific that Gloomy's had checked in, the bull sessions in the foxholes and the palm shacks went over and over the story of the one and only Gloomy, the man's man, who was a legend in his own time. And to this day, when Marines talk about the hero of the Corps, it's not the ones who wore the medals and dominated the conversation. It's the great Gloomy, who was as near to a fictional Marine of white price glory as an author could create, and who's known to Grace Harbor as the law enforcer, the sheriff of Pacific County, called Gloomy. The story of Gloomy Trezise would fill books and take hours to tell, for no man ever packed more action into a lifetime or did more with a cluster of years than the sheriff. It's not by any coincidence that I find his story tonight in our hometown scrapbook. Rather, it's very purposely dug out for tonight's page, for you see that Lieutenant Colonel O.P. Smith, who was Gloomy's 1st Battalion commander when he went into active duty with the Marines 10 years ago, was also my commanding officer, and when the reports from Korea today told of the remarkable saga of the fighting column of Marines during their way from the Shangji Reservoir to the sanctuary at the sea, and it called one of the great military feats of our time, they were talking about our old CO, for it was Major General Oliver Prince Smith, who once tried to make Marines out of Gloomy and myself, who today led the division out of the hills to write an epic that shines with the greatest, the greater perhaps, because it was a victory fashioned from a retreat that reminded me of O.P. Smith, and Smith reminded me of Gloomy, and Gloomy reminded me that I have never found a page containing the remarkable story of a most remarkable man who people all over the Southwest Washington remember as the sheriff and agree deserves a page tonight in our hometown scrapbook. Thanks for listening.